I never thought a single day could feel so different, so empty, so quiet. When I lost him, I thought it would be simple sadness. I thought grief meant tears at night, a hollow ache in my chest, and slowly moving on. I was wrong. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. The first morning after it happened, I woke up and everything seemed the same. The sunlight came through the windows, the birds were outside like always, the coffee smelled just like it did yesterday. But it wasn't the same. Nothing was. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to this right now? Are you curled up on your couch, maybe wrapped in a blanket? Or lying in bed, headphones in, letting the world fade away for a while? Maybe you're quietly listening while making a cup of tea, or even just sitting silently somewhere lost in thought. Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Sometimes knowing someone else is listening, someone else feels this too, makes the story a little less heavy. I had always been close to my family, not just my children or my spouse, but everyone who made up the little world around me. We had routines, little moments that made a house feel like a home. Sunday mornings with pancakes, laughter at the table, soft music in the evening, a cup of tea, and a quiet chat about the day. But when he passed, everything felt different. The kitchen felt emptier. The living room seemed colder. Even the sunlight through the window didn't feel warm anymore. I tried to carry on. I smiled at my children. I laughed when I could. I made his favorite coffee, thinking it would feel normal. But there was a hollowness that nothing could fill. I made mistakes. Small ones. Silent ones. Ones that I didn't even realize at the time. The first mistake was thinking silence would protect me. I stopped talking about how much I missed him. I stopped sharing my feelings. I thought if I kept it all inside, the memory of him would stay perfect. Instead, I built walls around myself. The second mistake was pushing people away. Not with anger, not with words. It was subtle. A look here, a pause there. I'm fine when I wasn't. I thought I was being strong, but slowly, my family drifted away. They didn't know how to reach me. The third mistake was ignoring small signs of love and care. A note on the table, a text message, a hug that I didn't return properly. I thought I didn't need them, that my grief was too heavy for anyone else. But slowly, the closeness I had taken for granted began to slip away. It wasn't until months later, sitting alone in the living room, watching the rain slide down the windows, that I realized what these mistakes had cost me. Not just him, not just his absence, but the distance growing between me and everyone else I loved. I wish I could tell you I noticed sooner. I wish I could tell you I fixed it quickly. But life teaches its hardest lessons quietly, slowly. When I think back to those days before everything changed, I remember the little details. The sound of laughter coming from the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked bread in the morning, the quiet humming of my spouse as he brewed coffee or read the paper by the window. We were ordinary in many ways, nothing dramatic or extraordinary, but we were close, very close. My children, though grown, would still gather around on Sunday mornings. We would talk about their lives, their friends, their dreams. We celebrated little victories and held each other through disappointments. My spouse had this quiet way of showing love. He never needed grand gestures. A hand on my shoulder, a look across the table, a gentle squeeze of my hand. Those little moments meant everything. They still do, in my memory. Our extended family would come around often, Siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins. The house was always filled with voices and chatter, small arguments over games or TV shows, laughter spilling from the living room into the kitchen. Those were the moments I now long for, more than anything. I had friends, too. Not many, but the ones I had were close. We would meet once a week, usually at my home, drinking tea, sharing stories. I often joked that my home was like a small hotel, full of noise, food, and warmth. I never realized then how much that warmth would fade when he was gone. He was the kind of man who noticed the small things. A crooked picture frame, a burnt cookie in the oven, a quiet sigh from one of the children. He would quietly fix it, smile, and never make a fuss. It's strange how ordinary things become extraordinary once they are gone. Our evenings were my favorite. After the children went to bed, we would sit in the living room, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about our day. We had this old sofa near the window where the light hit just right. I would sip tea while he read quietly beside me. There was a calm that only comes from years of shared life. A calm I didn't realize I would miss so desperately. I want to tell you about our home because it's important to know what was lost. Not just the people, but the feeling of togetherness, of safety, of belonging. The kitchen table where we shared meals and stories. The hallway lined with family photos, slightly crooked but full of memories. The little garden outside with flowers we planted together. Every corner held a memory. Every corner held him. My children. I still see them clearly in my mind. The way my oldest would rush into the kitchen for pancakes, laughing and teasing about syrup on their fingers. The younger one would sit quietly listening to stories about their father, eyes wide with curiosity. I now know how much they loved him, though I didn't always realize it at the time. We had family traditions, small ones, that seemed so normal. Birthday breakfasts, movie nights, holiday decorations that always ended up a little messy, a little crooked, but perfect in their imperfection. We celebrated small victories. We comforted each other in little defeats. And I always thought these moments would never end. I never noticed the subtle patterns of care he had created. The way he would always refill the water pitcher before it was empty. The way he would leave notes on the fridge for the children. Little reminders of love, unspoken but always there. Even his absence now carries lessons. I wish I had paid attention. I wish I had cherished the details more. I didn't know then that the world could shift so quietly, so completely, with just one absence. Our family wasn't perfect. No one's is. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments of tension. Sometimes we snapped at each other over small things. Sometimes words were sharper than they should have been. But beneath it all was love, a foundation of care and shared life I once thought unbreakable. I remember one quiet evening before everything changed. I was sitting in the living room, he was reading beside me, and the children were playing in the next room. I looked at him and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it made my chest ache. I thought, I hope we always have this. Little did I know, that day would become a memory I'd cling to. He had a quiet way of teaching, without ever seeming to teach, through his actions, his small gestures, his care. He taught patience, kindness, and the value of noticing the little things. I wish I had noticed even more. Our home felt safe and full of life. Even when tempers flared or disagreements arose, there was a rhythm, a balance. We were alive. We were together. And yet, I didn't realize how fragile life could be, that even the strongest bonds could be shaken when grief quietly enters. I want you to understand how ordinary, loving, and real our life was. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Everything I thought would never change did. Looking back, I see the small cracks forming even before the storm. Misunderstandings left unresolved, silences that lingered too long, moments I ignored, thinking there would always be more time. And then he was gone. With him, the rhythm of our home shifted. I didn't notice it immediately. I tried to hold on to normalcy, to keep everything the same. But grief doesn't allow normalcy. It enters quietly, changes everything, and teaches lessons too slowly for us to see until it's almost too late. After he left, the days felt longer, quieter, heavier. I kept routines alive. I made pancakes on Sunday mornings, brewed his favorite coffee, smiled at the children when they laughed. But inside, something was unraveling. I didn't notice it at first. The tension started quietly. A small misunderstanding at the breakfast table. My eldest spilled syrup and I barely reacted. Not out of anger, but distraction. I said, "It's okay," without really looking. They looked at me expecting more, but I couldn't give it. Later, I realized the children were trying to reach me in their own ways. A joke, a hug, questions about their father. I gave short answers, smiled when I could, nodded when they spoke, but I didn't truly connect. I thought I was protecting them from my sadness. Instead, I built a wall between us, brick by brick. At first, it didn't feel like much. A few silences here, small hesitations there. But gradually, the warmth faded. Laughter at the table became quieter, chatter in the living room less frequent. The children stopped coming into the kitchen as often. One evening, my youngest asked, "Mom, do you remember when Dad made us pancakes every Sunday?" I forced a smile. "Of course, honey, I remember." They waited, hoping for a story, a memory to share, but I didn't have the energy. I turned back to the stove, hoping they wouldn't notice the distance growing between us. I started noticing other things. Notes from my sister, emails from friends, small gestures of care. I ignored them, thinking I couldn't handle them yet. Later, I told myself. Later turned into days, and days into weeks. The children began sensing my absence even when I was physically there. One afternoon, my eldest came into the kitchen while I was chopping vegetables. "Mom, are you okay?" they asked quietly. I froze, then smiled. "Yes, I'm fine." They searched my face, probably sensing the truth, then nodded and walked away. That was the first real sting of distance. Small misunderstandings piled up. I misread messages, misinterpreted comments, assumed indifference. All of this created quiet tension no one spoke about. It wasn't anyone's fault, but everyone was hurt. Moments that could have healed things, a hug, a conversation, an honest answer, were left undone. Silence grew. One afternoon, I walked past the living room. The children sat together quietly. No laughter, no chatter, just a soft hum of activity. They were waiting, hoping I'd join them. I stayed in the kitchen, lost in my thoughts, thinking I was giving them space. I was wrong. Small comments soon revealed the impact of my distance. "You don't want to talk, Mom," my eldest said, frustrated in their voice. "I do," I whispered, but the words felt hollow. You seem different now," my youngest added softly. Those words cut deeper than anything I could imagine. I didn't know how to fix it. I began noticing his absence in ways I hadn't before. Simple habits missing, notes gone, quiet reminders of love absent. I tried to do them myself, but everything felt empty, mechanical. I was trying to maintain normalcy, but the warmth was gone. Family visits became tense. Aunt Mary would ask, "How are you holding up?" I'd smile. "I'm fine." She looked closer, sensing the unspoken. Still, I didn't share. I didn't tell anyone the weight of my mistakes. Even my friends noticed. A text unanswered here, a call I postponed there. I thought I needed solitude to grieve. I thought I was protecting them and myself. But isolation, I slowly realized, was a mistake. The tension grew quietly, like fog creeping across the living room floor. You can't see it at first, but after a while, it blankets everything. I began to feel it in the house, in the children's silence, in the way my friends hesitated before calling. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was real. There were moments of confrontation, soft but painful. One night, my eldest asked, "Mom, why do you always seem so far away?" I paused. I wanted to explain. I wanted to say, "I'm trying, I'm grieving, I'm scared." But instead I said nothing. I forced a smile. "I'm just tired, honey." And the words were enough to close the conversation, but not the distance. I started noticing that even small gestures from others didn't reach me anymore. A hug from my sister, a note from a friend, a smile from my children. I was too absorbed in my own grief to notice. And that's when I realized I had made a silent mistake. I had let grief become a wall. I had let my sorrow isolate me from the people I loved most. Another small mistake happened during a holiday. We tried to decorate the house together, like we used to. The children were excited, but I was distracted, lost in memories. I wasn't present. I didn't see the joy in their eyes. I didn't participate fully. And I noticed later, they were quieter that evening. The magic of our traditions was gone. I began to see patterns forming, small missteps, small silences, small walls being built. I realized that grief was no excuse for pushing people away. But I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to rebuild what I had unknowingly damaged. At work, I found myself distracted too. Tasks I normally completed with ease took longer. Small misunderstandings with colleagues grew. I didn't want to talk about him there, about the loss. And the tension outside the home mirrored what was happening inside. I remember one night sitting alone in my bedroom looking at a photo of him. I whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't know this would happen." The silence answered me. No one replied. No one could. I had to face the consequences of my mistakes alone. It's strange how small actions or inactions can slowly unravel a life. A forgotten hug, a dismissed question, a wall built out of grief. These were my silent mistakes, and they were slowly changing everything I loved without me even noticing. Even when the children tried to connect, I missed it. A soft question at the table, a note left on the counter, a gentle touch on my shoulder. I ignored them, thinking I needed more time, and that time never came in the way I expected. The rising tension in our home became more apparent. The children whispered to each other instead of speaking to me. The friends who once visited frequently called less. The warmth of our home was fading, and I was letting it happen. I started keeping a journal, trying to understand my feelings. But even on paper, I struggled to see clearly. I was trapped in a cycle of grief, silence, and unspoken guilt. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to fix. I would look around the house and see the absence of life where it once thrived. A chair left empty, a note unspoken, a conversation postponed. All because I thought I was protecting myself. all because I thought silence was strength. It all came to a head on a quiet, rainy afternoon. I had been feeling the distance growing between me and my children for weeks, maybe months. The house felt heavier than ever. Even the sound of rain on the window seemed to echo my loneliness. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the half-finished breakfast I had made for them. The smell of toast and coffee filled the room, but no one was eating. I heard them in the living room, whispering, quietly talking to each other instead of to me. And then it happened, a moment I'll never forget. My eldest came into the kitchen, their eyes full of frustration and hurt. "Mom," they said, voice trembling, "why are you always so distant? We try to reach you and you just shut us out." I froze. The words cut deeper than I ever expected. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but nothing came out. I wanted to tell them how much I loved them, how much I was struggling, but the words felt heavy, impossible to say. My youngest followed, tears in their eyes. "I miss you, Mom. We all miss Dad, too." I finally found my voice, but it was small, almost a whisper. I didn't realize. I didn't mean to push you away." They looked at me, not fully convinced, and I realized that words alone weren't enough. Not anymore. The silence I had allowed to grow had already done too much damage. Later that evening, I went into the living room and saw something that broke me even further. My sister had left a note on the table, gently asking if I was okay. I had ignored it. I had been too wrapped up in my grief to respond. And my friend, someone who had always been there, had sent messages that I never replied to. I realized then that I had made my third silent mistake, ignoring the care and love others were offering me. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious. But it was real, and it was hurting everyone around me. The turning point came a few days later, when my eldest confronted me again, this time more firmly. "Mom," they said, "we feel like you're not here with us anymore. We're scared of losing you too." Those words hit me like a wave. I sat down and held their hands, tears streaming down my face. "I am here," I said. "I'm here now. I promise I'll try harder. I'm so sorry for the silence. I didn't know how much it was hurting all of us." It wasn't easy. It took time to rebuild the trust and closeness I had let slip away. But that moment, that confrontation, was the first step. Emotional and deep. I began noticing the little things again. The notes left on the table, the quiet hugs, the soft words of encouragement from my children. I started responding, reaching out, and fully participating in their lives. One evening after dinner, my youngest said, "Mom, thank you for being here tonight. It feels like things are back to normal." And I realized that normal would never be the same. But it could be good again, warm, loving, full of connection. I just had to be present, truly present. I also started noticing my own mistakes. I had let grief isolate me, allowed silence to build walls, and overlooked the signs of love and care around me. Recognizing these mistakes was painful, but necessary. Without acknowledgement, there could be no repair. I spent time with my children just listening, not giving advice, not rushing to fix things, just listening. We shared memories of their father, the little things that made him special. We laughed, we cried, we remembered together. Gradually, the tension in the house lifted. The walls I'd built with my silence began to crumble, and the love that had always been there started to flow again. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, sitting in the garden while the children played, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Even in my mistakes, there was a lesson in presence, in listening, in noticing the small acts of love we often take for granted. I realized grief doesn't end, it changes shape. It becomes a quiet companion rather than a raging storm. While it can isolate, it also teaches us to value the people around us more deeply. There were small victories along the way, a hug when I least expected it, a note of forgiveness, a simple, sincere, "I love you." These moments reminded me why repairing frayed bonds was worth the effort. Then came the day I finally spoke openly about my grief. I shared everything with my children, how much I missed their father, how I had struggled, how my mistakes had pushed everyone away. They listened, holding my hands, offering comfort in the unique ways only children can. "I understand, Mom," my eldest said softly. "We love you. We missed you too." It was a turning point, the first real moment of emotional repair, the first time we acknowledged our pain together instead of letting it fester silently. From then on, small gestures regained their power. Sunday breakfasts were warm again. Evening chats were no longer rushed. The house felt alive, not the same as before, but alive in a new way. I began reaching out to friends and family I had neglected, explaining my silence, my grief, my struggles. Most understood, most forgave. And slowly, I began to forgive myself for the silence, for the walls, for not seeing the love around me sooner. I realized mistakes don't define us. They can hurt and distance, but they can also teach, heal, and bring people closer when acknowledged. That turning point, our heartfelt conversation, changed everything. It reminded me that love is active, not passive, that presence matters more than perfection, that silence, while comforting, can quietly destroy what matters most if left unchecked. From that moment, I vowed to be fully present, to listen, to notice, to respond, to love openly, even in grief. Gradually, the warmth of family returned, laughter returned. The love we almost lost was being rebuilt, stronger and more conscious than ever. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Some days remained heavy, some mornings the absence still pressed down like a shadow, but I learned presence mattered more than perfection. Showing up, listening, noticing, that was the true work of healing. I began small, a quiet cup of coffee with my eldest, a walk with my youngest, sharing memories and listening to their laughter. I didn't force anything. I simply allowed myself to be fully there. The children noticed. They sought me out again, a hug in the hallway, a question over dinner, a story shared before bedtime. Simple moments, but to me, they were everything. I reached out to friends, admitted my silence and grief, and almost everyone responded with care. Love waits patiently for us to return. At home, routines came back to life. Sunday breakfast regained warmth. Evening conversations flow naturally, sometimes about ordinary things, sometimes about memories of him. We laughed again, quietly at first, then with ease. The house felt lighter, no longer echoing absence, but alive with life. I remember one evening at the table, sharing a meal with my children. It felt different, not perfect, not flawless, but connected. We talked about our day, our feelings, even little irritations. I realized connection isn't about avoiding pain or mistakes. It's about acknowledging them, facing them together, and continuing to care. It took time for the guilt to recede, but I gave myself grace. I knew healing was not a straight line path. It was a dance between pain, hope, and remembrance. I knew healing was possible even after mistakes. Emotional and deep. I started noticing the little gestures of love around me again. Notes left on the counter. Hugs that were offered without words. A simple smile across the room. I stopped ignoring them. I embraced them. Each small act of love became a reminder that life continues and relationships can heal if we choose to nurture them. I also forgave myself. I forgave myself for the silence, for the walls, for ignoring the love around me. I had been caught in grief, yes, but I had learned that grief didn't need to isolate me. It could teach me to be more present, more aware, more loving. One quiet afternoon, my youngest came running to me with a drawing. "I made this for you, Mom," they said, eyes shining. It was simple, just colors and shapes, but it felt like a message of love. I hugged them tightly, whispering, "Thank you, sweetheart. I love it. I love you." These moments, seemingly small, became my daily reminders of what mattered. The mistakes I had made were not erased, but they were forgiven. The distance that had grown was slowly closing, and the love that had always been there was stronger, more conscious, more real. I also began to create new memories, small ones that could help us heal together. Afternoon walks in the park, movie nights at home with blankets and popcorn, cooking together, laughing over burnt edges and spilled ingredients. We honored the past, remembering him, but we also embraced the present. I learned to share my grief openly with my children. We talked about him, about the things we missed, about the moments that made him special. It wasn't always easy. Tears came, sometimes unexpectedly, but tears shared with love and understanding felt different. They healed. Even the friends I had pushed away came back into my life. We shared quiet conversations, remembering the old times, talking about our struggles, supporting each other. I realized that relationships are never perfect, but they can be repaired if we are willing to show up. I also learned that mistakes, while painful, are opportunities to grow. My 3 silent mistakes, the walls I built with grief, the distance I allowed, the love I ignored, they taught me the importance of presence, empathy, and communication. I wish I had learned sooner, yes, but I am grateful I learned it all. One quiet evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset with my children beside me. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. I felt warmth in my chest, a quiet gratitude that I hadn't felt in months. Life was not perfect. The grief was still there, quietly whispering in the background. But the love, the connection, the presence, that was alive. And that mattered more. I also started to notice myself differently. I was more patient, more attentive, more mindful. I noticed the little details that once seemed ordinary. The way the light hit the kitchen in the morning, the sound of laughter in the living room, the smell of rain on the pavement. These small things became my anchors, reminding me that life continues and beauty exists even in pain. I began to document our days in a journal. Not long essays, just small notes. Shared pancakes with the kids today. Laughed about syrup on fingers. Walked in the park. Saw a family of ducks. Children squealed with delight. Listened to my eldest talk about school. Felt connected again. These small entries became reminders of healing. They reminded me that even after loss, life can regain its rhythm. Even after mistakes, relationships can be mended. I realized that love is active. It is not passive. It requires effort, attention, and presence. Grief doesn't excuse us from loving the people around us. It can coexist with love, but it cannot replace it. The children began to trust me again. Slowly but surely, their smiles returned. Their laughter filled the rooms. We shared secrets, dreams, and small worries. And I listened. Truly listened. I also began to appreciate the small gestures from my spouse's memory. The coffee cup left on the counter, the note tucked under a plate, the way he always made the smallest effort to show love. I started incorporating those little things into our daily lives. It was my way of honoring him, keeping his memory alive while rebuilding what I had almost lost. One rainy evening, I sat with my children on the couch, a blanket over our laps. We watched the rain fall, listening to the soft patter against the window. And I said quietly, "I'm so sorry for the times I wasn't here. I promise to be here now. Every day, in every way I can." They smiled, and it felt like a balm for all the unspoken words, all the silent mistakes. It felt like the first real step toward complete healing. The house was no longer heavy with absence. It was filled with presence, love, and small moments of joy. We were not perfect. We would never be perfect. But we were together. And together, we were stronger. I realized that mistakes are part of life. They can hurt, they can distance, they can cause silence, but they can also teach, heal, and strengthen relationships if we face them with courage and love. Every day, I remind myself, notice the little gestures, respond to the love offered, be present, even when it's hard. Listen, even when silence feels safer, because those small acts are what hold us together. They are what prevent distance from growing. They are what make life, even in grief, worth living. I've learned to grieve and love at the same time. To feel the absence, yet embrace the presence. To acknowledge mistakes, yet move forward. To forgive myself, yet continue striving to be better. And slowly, the house, the children, the friends, the life, it all began to feel warm again. It wasn't the same as before, and it never will be. But it was alive, full of love, full of connection. And that, I realized, is what matters most. Sitting by the window, one quiet evening, I watched the last light of the day fade into soft shades of blue and pink. The house was calm. The children were playing quietly, occasionally giggling over some small joke. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. I thought about everything that had happened, the loss, the silence, the mistakes I had made. At first, it felt overwhelming, like the weight of grief would crush me forever. But slowly, I began to understand something important. Grief doesn't destroy if we allow it to teach. Mistakes don't define us if we face them with honesty and love. I realized that the 3 silent mistakes I had made, shutting people out, letting distance grow, ignoring small gestures of love, had brought me to my knees. Yes, but they also taught me the value of presence, empathy, and listening. They reminded me that life is fragile and the people we love are precious. I looked at my children and saw them differently now, not just as little beings who needed me, but as individuals with feelings, needs, and hearts just as fragile as mine. I understood that being present didn't mean always being cheerful or perfect. It meant being there, fully, for the little moments that truly matter. I thought about the friends and family I had neglected. I felt grateful for their patience, for the second chances, for the love that waited silently for me to return. It reminded me that relationships are not always perfect, but they are worth fighting for, worth nurturing, worth cherishing. That evening, I sat with my children on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. We didn't speak much, but the silence was comfortable, warm, full of understanding. I held their hands and whispered, "I love you. I will always try to be here with you." And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift slightly. I learned that love is not about grand gestures or words alone. It is about showing up every day, about noticing the little things, about listening, even when it's hard, about forgiving ourselves and others for mistakes and moving forward together. Grief, I realized, is not something to fight against. It is something to hold gently, allowing it to teach us compassion, presence, and patience. Mistakes, too, are not the end. They are reminders to choose love over silence, connection over distance, awareness over neglect. As I watched the children play beneath the last rays of sunset, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was still learning, still growing, still healing, but I was here, fully present, alive in love despite the absence that once felt so unbearable. And I knew, without a doubt, that this is what truly matters. To notice, to care, to be present. To embrace the small moments, the simple gestures, the shared laughter. To forgive, to repair, to love. Because life is fragile. Love is precious. And even in the midst of loss, there is hope. There is warmth. There is connection. And I promise, from this day forward, to never forget that. To never let silence grow where love belongs. To always be present for the people I love and for myself.